agree with one another, live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. 2 Corinthians 13, 11 through 13. Hi, my name is Curran.
Hi, Curran.
I'm a recovering coward. I've been having some necessary and painful conversations with myself these past 2 weeks. As awareness of the pandemic of racism continues to spread and white people come to realize that our well-meaning allyship with black people in this country has not been enough to stop the state-sanctioned violence against black and brown bodies. I have to pause to ask myself again, how, and maybe more importantly, why I have been so afraid to do my part in disassembling white supremacy and racism. A couple of things about being an ally. It's a good place to begin, but only useful if it is accompanied by a willingness to grow. Moreover, Demetra Smith, a friend who will share her thoughts with us next Sunday, recently said that black people don't need more white allies. What they need are white accomplices. To be clear, accomplice is defined as a person who helps another in a crime or wrongdoing, often a subordinate. But in this context, the word accomplice is subversive. Used in this way, it subverts the dominant paradigm. I believe what Demetra is saying is that what black people in America need now are white people to help undo the crimes and wrongdoing that is passed as acceptable in our country for more than 400 years. And subordinate? Yes, subordinate. What black and brown and indigenous communities need now are white people who do not try to speak for, but hold space, amplify, and support voices of culture while quietly and consistently untangling the deadly web of racism and the social constructs of whiteness that have poisoned the well. Think of a bird's nest in your fishing line. Jesus calls us to be fishers of men, but we can't even get the hook in the water until we sit down with the big ball of mess and untangle it. We're going to get frustrated. We're going to want to stop. But the job is to patiently and methodically sort through the knots. Mend your ways. Encourage one another. Agree with one another. Live in peace, and the God of love will be with you. Mend your ways. This scripture is my point of departure for the message, but I don't plan to exegete it. I hope you might be able to recognize in my words the ways in which this scripture and others like it have continued to shape me like water dripping on a stone. Bell Hooks writes, "To be loving, we will willingly hear one another's truths, and most important, we will affirm the value of truth-telling." It's hard to tell our truths. It can become awkward, can feel embarrassing. That's why most of us don't do it. But the chance we have of moving forward requires that we have the courage to tell our truths, and in doing so, to create new truths. So here is some of my truth. I was leaving my parents' house on the way to the protest march in Sonoma when my mom looked at me and said, "You know, your grandfather watched a man being lynched." The year was 1929. My grandfather, Earl LaRoe, grew up in Kaufman, Texas. He never completed the 6th grade. He tended cotton fields with black sharecroppers who worked and lived on the land. Those men and women taught him how to farm. They taught him how to fish. They taught him how to live. They looked out for him and he looked out for them, but on that day, coming out of the 5 and dime, he watched a black man being dragged through the streets and hung by a tree to die. And my grandfather stood silent. I'm 53 years old. My mother is 76, and this is the first time she has made mention of this story. I have to wonder why that is. I wonder how that trauma lived in my grandfather's body, and how it might have gotten passed on to my mother, and even to me. His shame for having stood silent while an innocent man died left a legacy of pain and secrecy in his family and in mine. I learned from my own father that if I wanted to get anywhere in this world, I'd better play nice, feign ignorance, or better yet, keep my mouth shut entirely. I learned that if I spoke out, I might not be accepted, and I desperately wanted to be accepted. So as a young woman growing up, I learned that I could lose my job or my chances of a boyfriend to someone less opinionated. I've always had quite a bit of shame about not speaking up more at the dinner table, in casual conversation, at parties. What I know is that when I did try, I had trouble getting past the lump in my throat, or the voices in my head reminding me what was at stake. I think I was so afraid that if and when I did say something that would buck the status quo, it might come out all wrong. And not only would I suffer rejection, I'd end up looking like a fool. Somewhere I missed the lesson that to get good at anything takes practice. Everyone is a beginner sometime, and the only way we get better is by trying and failing and trying and failing and trying and failing better. With lots of support, I've gotten better at speaking out. But you'll have to bear with me because this story takes about 30 years. April 29th, 1992. I graduated from college and moved back home to save money for my own apartment. It was early morning when I'd driven down to San Francisco to record my first national commercial, a Little Caesars pizza ad. It was in an industrial warehouse in downtown near Fisherman's Wharf. And we just wrapped filming at the end of a very long day when one of the EDs pulled the director aside to tell him that rioting had broken out all over LA in response to the Rodney King verdict. They were afraid the same might happen in San Francisco, and they couldn't let us leave until they knew we would be safe. We waited in that hot, sweltery warehouse for another 8 hours. And I heard racial slurs like you wouldn't believe. But I didn't say anything. I was too afraid to rock the boat. That was 28 years ago, when 4 Los Angeles policemen were acquitted for savagely beating Rodney King. It was caught on camera. We all saw it. Most of us did nothing. Once the rioting stopped, so too did any meaningful or lasting conversation about racial profiling and police brutality. That was 28 years ago, and I was 25 years old. I'd grown up in the church, grew up in a good Christian family, had a liberal arts education from a fine university, yet no one had ever taught me how to examine my own racial bias. No one had made any effort to teach me how to be an advocate for people of color in America. I didn't know where to begin. I really didn't begin until 1997, when I entered seminary. It was there I learned about how cosmology and social location affect the way we see the world. It was there I learned about colonialism and the missionaries beating and torturing indigenous children in an effort to tame their savagery. I was 28 years old when I began to awaken to our country's tragic history of systematic, structural, and institutional racism. A shout out here to the queer community for teaching me a whole lot about the intersectionality of marginalization. Still, it would take me another full decade to really begin to comprehend the legacy of slavery in its myriad forms, both seen and unseen. I felt ashamed that it had taken me this long. I felt angry that the people I trusted in my life had not seen fit to open my eyes sooner. And I began to push back, but only so much. Because now I was a queer pastor employed by liberal churches. Fast forward to 2009, in my early 40s, serving a UCC church in Tiburon, California. My previous call had been in the Midwest, and we had owned a beautiful home there, but we moved back to California, and the closest place my wife and I could afford to live was 45 minutes away from my church in Tiburon. The house we bought was off of the Fruitvale exit in East Oakland. It was a beautiful little house, and it took the help of our family, everyone in our family, a sizable bank loan and a secondary loan from the church my wife was serving at the time. When Katie and I moved into that lovely neighborhood in East Oakland, we recognized that we were becoming a part of the systemic regentrification of Black and brown neighborhoods. We didn't know what to do. In the early morning hours of New Year's Day, Oscar Julius Grant was shot by BART police officer Johannes Messerly at the Fruitvale train station. He was pronounced dead a day later at the same hospital in Oakland where he had been born just 22 years earlier. A full year later, and I'm 3 years into my call in Tiburon, Johannes Messerly was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to just 2 years in prison less time served. Understandably, people took to the streets in Oakland. But the folks in Tiburon had little to no understanding of what was going on in my neighborhood. And all I could feel was that same lump in my throat. Afraid that if I said the wrong thing, I might upset the people in my congregation. I started to push back, but not too far. I look back on it now and I wonder how I could have been so insecure. Black Lives Matter was founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murder. And I was still not quick to catch on. I had to be talked out of putting a sign in my front window that said all lives matter because I wanted to do the right thing, but I was afraid to offend anyone. I am so ashamed. I should have known better. But I've been a coward. Seth Godin wrote a book called How to Lead When It's Your Turn, and It's Always Your Turn. It's taken me a lifetime to figure out that leading doesn't mean waiting until you think you have it right. I've had to learn how to lead when my knees are trembling and my voice catches in my throat. I know enough now to know that there will always be so much that I will never know. I know that we need to create cultures of competency so that our children and our churches and our educational systems understand that while we may strive to be one, we are not all the same. I know that I will be untangling the bird's nest of racism inside me until I take my very last breath, but I also know that I have an obligation to tell the truth and to keep doing the work. I know that I am likely to say the right things in the wrong ways and pray that God's grace will walk beside me. Because what I understand now is that all lives can't matter until Black lives matter. What I know is that it's going to take every single one of us to put this country to right. Beloved, we must become change makers. We must become accomplices. I know it can be scary. I know it may not feel like enough. But in the words of Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Amen.